Hello everyone, welcome back to the third part of React Hook series. This is JSLogs, where we talk about JavaScript and its framework and other stuff. So previously, we talked about useState, useEffect, useContext, and useRef. Today we are going to look into two more hooks, but they are mainly focused on performance. So the first one would be useMemo, and the second one is going to be useCallback. So these are the two hooks that we are going to look at today. Let's dive right in. Let's start with useMemo, right? So useMemo, why do we use it? What is the reason? What problem does it solve? So a lot of the time you will find yourself doing some calculation, doing some process that takes a lot of time. And you don't want to do that calculation on every single update. You want to do those certain calculations based on certain values that okay, if value A changes, that is when you should calculate it. If value B change, we don't care. We keep the same calculation result and we don't have to change it anymore, right? So it only depends on value A. So that's where use memo comes in, right? It tells the React that okay, when state 1 changes, only and only then you should calculate this function. Otherwise, you do not do that. So basically, it lets you cache the result of calculation between re-renders, right? So let me give you a example. Let's dive right in, right? Let's look at this example. So this is a playground that I use for my videos, where I can write React code directly in the browser, see result, and I can also share with you guys the link so that you can also view it directly. Okay, let's look into the code. Let's say this is a simple React component, right? I have one state, which is account, and another state, which kind of just tells me that, okay, whether it is dark or not, right? So let's say we have this function which does some heavy calculation, maybe just like make some call to the backend API, and then based on that result, it does some long calculation. Let's just say you're rendering mm, pins on a map and they're like 10,000 pins or something like that. So it's gonna take, it can be any heavy calculation here. I'm just mocking it right now with a for loop. So let's imagine that at the moment we are not using use memo, right? What we are gonna do, we just call it directly. What happens, right? Let's also open up the console on the right side, right? And we can look at the console only. All right, amazing. Okay, so if I click on increment count, now you will see that it took a bit of time and then it changes to 1. Then again click, took a bit of time and changes to 2 and 4. Now if I want to toggle the dark mode, the problem is that the heavy calculation based on only on count. So if I change from dark mode to light mode, I don't need to calculate this, right? But what happens right now? So if I toggle it, you see the dark mode is kind of slow. If I toggle it back, again it's slow. So even if I change any other state, this is being calculated. So what do we do? So in that scenario, in that case, for you, the use memo comes in, right? So what does it do? This is the function that React gives us, use memo. What does it do? It accepts a callback that, okay, this is a function that I would execute, and when should I do that, right? So this is the condition. This is the uh, you can say the dependency, right? So this is the dependency array, and in that array we basically pass the count, that when the count changes, only and only then you should calculate this heavy calculation. Otherwise don't do it. Otherwise we don't care about it, right? Otherwise we just use the cached result. We don't do anything else. So now the use memo is here, right? Now let's see what happens, right? So if I increment count, it's still the slow, right? A bit slow. again it's slow. But if I toggle dark mode, now it's instant, right? There's no delay, there's no gap between the render and like the whole reaction from the UI. So there's no delay there. So this is the power of useMemo. This is how useMemo works for you. So basically it's cache the calculation and also tell them that, okay, only do it on the change of this variable. Or let's say if I just remove it entirely, right? If I remove it entirely, so what happens, right? So if I click it and I click it and I click it, so it doesn't do anything because uh, it only kind of renders it first time. It is no dependency, it doesn't re-render. So you need to tell something, you need to provide something based on which change, right? It needs to change based on that. Let's say if I have 2, right? So initial value for me is 2. So now this is 4. I can increment it. It's not gonna change anything because we did this calculation once. So if you don't provide any dependency, it will only calculate it once and then it will not calculate it anymore at all. Right, so this is also another use case of it. Let's say you just want to do a calculation once when the computer component renders and you don't want to do it again. So this is how you would do it. You don't provide any dependency, you just provide an empty array. But if you want something like, for example, for the count, since it depends on the count, then you provide that. Then it will change based on the value of the count. So I hope this was clear and easy to understand. So this is how the useMemo works. It stores your calculation, caches it so that you don't have to make certain calculation and again. All right. So that was useMemo for us, right? So let's move on to the second one, useCallback. So this is also a hook that is used for caching purpose, but the difference is between useMemo and useCallback. useCallback is used to cache functions rather than values, right? So let's look at example directly so that it's more easier to understand, right? So if I go here, there's a useCallback. All right. So let's look at the component right now. So I have this component app. In there, I have simple heading. I have a count with the count state, and I have a button which clicks on set. With basically on click, it updates the set count. And I have a child component which calls the increment function. And what happens inside of it? So let's kind of bring it down, comment it out, and keep it simple, right? Let's keep this simple. That what it does do, it basically does this, right? So increment, set count, so pretty much the same thing like what we are doing for the parent increment. So what happens? Let's look at it, right? So when I click on the parent increment, I increment it, parent was rendered, and the child button was also rendered. If I click on child button, it does the same thing, right? So let's say what I want to do, I want to stop the rendering of the child component because this is unnecessary. For me, this child rendering is very unnecessary because the component, the function itself, it does not change. What the function does, it does not change. The state that is changing is belongs to parent, and child is not doing anything with it, right? And no prop for the child is changing. So for this purpose, you want to improve the performance. And how do you do that? For any function that does not change and you want the child to not render unnecessarily, you use callback. You basically cache the function. For example, let's say I bring it back. Let's bring it back and you go back here. So what happens now, right? So initially, previously, like when I clicked on parent increment, it kind of showed us both of these consoles, right? Now if I do it, parent increment, so parent rendered, but the child was not rendered again. So this is a really good use case for this, that you don't want the children to render unnecessarily, because that affects performance. And if I click on child button, again, parent was rendered because the state that was changing belongs to parent. The child itself is a controlled component. Unless the proper props of the child component changes, we should not render it unnecessarily. That's what useCallback helps us with, right? That the function is now, the function definition is not changing. So in turn, the properties for our child is not changing. Another thing that you probably noticed, that we are using React.memo. So React.memo works in combination with useCallback. So if I remove this, let's say I remove this, right? Now, if I click on parent component, parent increment, we see both render, child, and we see both render. So this React.memo is really important, because this tells React that memoize this component. What does that mean? It means that do not recreate or re-render this children, this component, unless the properties of this component change. If they don't change, do not render it. And we only accept on-click function here. And in order to cache functions, what do we have? We have useCallback. So we cache this function. We only define it once. As I said, that we are not providing any dependency. So we are only defining it once, and we are passing it to increment. So what happens if I pass count, right? It will be recreated every single time. You see, so parent increment, now I see both again. Child, I see both again. Why? Because count is changing. And when count changes, this is called again, and the state of the function changes. So now that prop is changing, the that's the child is rendering. So this is why this is not really a good way of doing it, right? So I just remove it, and now it is only defined once and only once, right? So let me just show that again. Parent rented and parent rented. So this is what useCallback helps us with in caching the function, and useMemo helps us with caching a value, a result itself. So this is the main difference between useCallback and useMemo, and this is one use case that you can have with child and parent rendering. I hope that was clear and you were able to understand and differentiate when to use useMemo or useCallback. If you have any confusion, leave a comment down below. I would be very happy to explain it to you, or any topic that you want me to cover. I would be glad to cover that as well. Well, thank you so much for joining. See you next time.